dear ladies and gentlemen, dear members. We hope that you had a good holiday and a very good start to the new year, that you had the opportunity to recharge and that you feel energized for 2022. At the Swiss Canadian Chamber of Commerce Ontario, we are looking forward to actually moving forward together with you this year. And we are going to start today with discussing a topic that is definitely forward-thinking, artificial intelligence. Our moderator for the day is our member Antoine Belayev, lead for North America at Fertig, and also delegate to the Council of the Swiss Abroad. And our guest speaker is Dr. Gael Bernard. So Antoine and Gael, thank you very much for joining us tonight. And I'm going to hand it over to you, Antoine, now.
Thanks, Alexandra. There's something really fascinating about artificial intelligence. I work for a company called Fertig. We specialize in mobile ticketing, and we make extensive use of artificial intelligence to determine that you're actually riding public transit and that you have finished your trip. So I was really excited when I found out that one of our Swiss Club members is an expert in the field. So I'm very happy to introduce today Gael Bernard. Gael is a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Toronto in the Faculty of Information and instructor for the course Machine Learning with Applications in Python, taught at the Master of Information. His research interests lie at the frontier between machine learning, process mining, and customer journey analytics. Gael holds a PhD in information systems from the University of Lausanne, HEC Lausanne in Switzerland, and he co-founded Odaya.ai, a Toronto-based startup that leverages artificial intelligence to deliver fact-based insights on customer behaviors. So our Gael will speak to us today for about 40-45 minutes, and then we'll have time for questions. Feel free to ask your questions in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll do our best to ask Gael some of your questions when we're done, and we'll do our very best to finish Swiss style on time. So without further ado, Gael.
Thank you so much. So thanks a lot for the invitation. I'm really glad to be here today, so to talk about artificial intelligence, so opportunities and challenges. So I will provide like a really short resume. I started with an apprenticeship in Switzerland of médiaticien. I don't think that this job exists somewhere else abroad. And then I became a media engineer at the University of Applied Science of Yverdon-les-Bains. I got a master and then a PhD from HEC Lausanne in information systems. And so, yes, I wanted to highlight that I appreciate the freedom of the Swiss education system that allows to start from practice and then to join academia later, which is not so easy to do in other countries. So in 2018, I co-founded Odaya, a customer journey analytic platform that currently employs 36 employees. And I arrived last January in Canada at Toronto to do a postdoc at the University of Toronto. I'm working with Professor Pericles Henritzos. I also want to give him a lot of credit because I'm working with him since 6 years. We are now approaching the end of an era. So yeah, thanks to Pericles also to have given me the opportunity to work on artificial intelligence for the last 6 years. And yeah, let's get started. So a brief agenda. This presentation will mainly have 3 different parts. So in the part 1 and 2, so first I will introduce artificial intelligence to give a definition. It will be really brief. Then we will talk about AI in practice, and I will talk a lot about cheese. So I hope that you're not hungry. Otherwise, we will lose some participants during the talk. And in the part 3, I will talk about customer journey analytics. So part 1 and 2 is more general. And in the part 3, it's more about the work I've been conducting in the last 6 years. Let's jump into the part 1. So, brief definition of artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is systems that can think like human, think rationally, or act like human, or act rationally. So it's a really broad definition, and we will see it in the case studies later. So it's really easy to understand artificial intelligence using a simple schema, like a system. We can see artificial intelligence as being the real world, from which some inputs are extracted to give to a certain system. And this system will do some black magic and then output some stuff. So the input could be images, video, sound, heartbeats, GPS, location. It could be temperature. It could be many things. And the output could be some prediction or some movement or some recommendation, some insight. So it can take many different forms. So of course, artificial intelligence exists in many different areas. And in order for this system to work, you you have a prerequisite, a learning phase. So you have to teach the system how to treat the data to have the correct output. This is it for the first part. I will not describe more what is artificial intelligence. I think it will become clear when I will present the different case studies. So I will provide some few examples that should trigger some interesting discussion and highlight some important key principles that are really important when you are implementing some artificial intelligence in your project. Implementing as a engineer, or implementing because you are part of a team that would like to implement some AI in your company. So I will highlight the important key principle using these pink post-it, and I will come back to it later in the presentation. So the first case study is hacklet.world. So it's a website. It's not mine. I just want to highlight that it's some case studies. It's a really cool website where you can input the number of adults and the number of child, and you also provide what you would like to eat with your raclette, and you hit the button compute, and this website will tell you the quantity of ingredients that you need to buy. It's really cool. It's really simple. So I encourage you to have a look. Now the question is it really artificial intelligence? It might sound a bit too much to call it artificial intelligence, but if we go back to the schema that I introduced before, we have on one part the real world. From the real world, we extract the number of adults and the number of children. We give it as an input to the system, and then the system will figure out the quantity of cheese that you need to buy and output this as an information. So, and you also have like a learning phase here. So the learning phase here is to set the ideal quantity of cheese that adults and children are eating. And once you have set this information, then you can calculate the ideal quantity of cheese that you need to buy. So using the definition that we have seen of AI, yes, we can call this artificial intelligence. However, if you call this system artificial intelligence, then when you use a calculator to transform some Swiss francs in Canadian dollar, your calculator should also deserve the same treatment. So you should also call this like a artificial intelligence calculator. And it's a bit absurd. So yes, it is. Yes, you can call it artificial intelligence, but it's a bit like it's. I would say that it's not the best term, and you should be careful about it. So the author of this great tool went one step further. Instead of just calling it artificial intelligence, they also claim that their work is a result of hundreds of hours of research, development, and the three co-founders have developed a post-quantum AI technologies based on blockchain in the metaverse. So this is obviously nonsense that are here probably either to impress the users or just as a joke. I don't want to blame them. I really like their sense of humor, and I think there is nothing wrong doing that. But this case study give me a good opportunity to highlight that people that are developing or implementing AI should have a professional responsibility to tell the truth. So this is the first principle that exists in AI, is that you have, as a service provider of artificial intelligence technique, you have the professional responsibility of telling something, to not exaggerate and to only tell the truth. What is really interesting is that last month, this tool was reported in more than 14 mainstream French media. So none of them reported that this is probably a joke, and they all talked about artificial intelligence and that this system was really advanced. So yeah, I think it's pretty interesting because this is typically what could occur with some startup, where some startup are overselling what they have and they call it artificial intelligence, while in fact it might only be some simple techniques. So if I will try to scare you a little bit, I will try to describe an episode of Black Mirror. Let's say that the author invent a new version of the tool that would be really super precise, but in order to work, you need to put some camera around the table, so it would recognize who is around the table and to know exactly what quantity of cheese that they would eat. And I'm just putting this scenario here to highlight that a lot of time you also have you have to give up some privacy to access some technologies. So you have to ask yourself the question, how much of your privacy are you willing to give up for services provided by AI? And probably here, if you need to be recorded while eating raclette, this is probably too much impact on your privacy for the benefit that it will bring. So let's take now a more serious example. So this is from the EDAP. So again, this is not my work, but I think this is really fascinating. So the author developed an advanced algorithm where you can teach a robot how to do raclette autonomously. So first of all, you have the learning phase, as we have seen in the schema. So you have to teach the robot how to do raclette. And this is very complex. It doesn't sound like this. It doesn't sound like this complex like this, but the robot will not simply repeat exactly the movement that was learned, but it can take into consideration like because of the temperature of the room, the density of the cheese, and other factor. Because of this, every time that you are grating the cheese, the pressure that you need to put on the cheese will be different. And their algorithm can take this complex setting into consideration. So it will not only repeat what you have given as an instruction to the machine, but it can also take some other component into consideration to have the perfect raclette. So once the learning phase is done, then the robot can do raclette on its own, which is, again, I believe, really cool. So the name of the author is at the bottom of the page here. And the question is it AI? I believe that for this use case, we can clearly claim that this is AI, but I will take again the schema. So we have on one side the real world, which is some instruction saying, for instance, I want a raclette. You give it to the system. The system here, in this case, it's a Bayesian Gaussian mixture model conditioning. So this is what the author have invented to take the complex settings of parameter into consideration, and it will output the perfect raclette. So, and you have the learning phase where you have to teach the machine how to do the raclette. Now, with this use case, I want to highlight a second principle, which is accountability. The question is, if the raclette fails, who is responsible? So is it the person who taught the robot? Is it the person who built the robot? Is it the person who invented the algorithm? Or is it the chase maker problem? So using AI, we multiply the sources of error that we might have, and it could be difficult to trace back where the error is coming from. So of course, for Hacklet, we can say, who cares? Let's just have one more drink, and then we can wait a little bit to have the next another Hacklet. But of course, this technology could be used to, for instance, to perform some open heart surgery. So in this case, if you fail, then it's really important to be able to identify where the problem is coming from so that you can avoid it the next time. And in fact, this machine was not, the only purpose of this machine is not to grate cheese, but it's, you can move objects around using this robot. You can also do some advanced operation like erasing a whiteboard, or you can do some more useful stuff like helping elderly to put shoes, for instance. So if you are interested in this project, please do not hesitate to go on their website. It's at the bottom left of the slide here. And one issue that might occur when using this kind of technology is, of course, safety. What happened? We need to be sure that the machine will not harm for instance, the elderly that are using the machine. So for the last example, I wanted to have only 3 examples with Hacklet, but I couldn't find a last example. So this one will be more standard. It's about Amazon. So Amazon leverages AI to speed up the selection of the ideal candidates out of thousands of resumes. And so if we see it through the system eyes, so on one side we have some resume, we give it as input to the system. And the system here, my educated guess is that it's ensemble models or deep neural network. I'm not sure about this because Amazon didn't share details about their algorithm. But then as output, you have a decision. Should we invite this candidate for an interview, or can we reject the package? And of course, for the system to work, you have a prerequisite, which is to provide thousands of resumes to the system and to indicate for each resume if it's a good resume or a bad resume that you would like to reject. And it went completely wrong because the AI proved acting in a discriminatory way by automatically excluding women. So what was the problem? I will attempt to provide 3 answers. They might be wrong, but this is some tentative answers. So first of all, there were probably some bias in the data. So most resumes were most likely coming from men. And in machine learning or in artificial intelligence in general, it is hard to work with unbalanced classes. So to work with a specific segment of resume that would be a woman, if we have too few of them, it's hard to extract information. So as a consequence, the algorithm would just discard their resume. That could be one explanation. Another explanation is that AI will only replicate what was done in the past. So in the past, if you had some discriminatory decisions that were made, the AI will just replicate them. And another mistake that, another source of the problem is that maybe they use a system that was too complex. I will show in the next slide what I mean by that. But the more complex the system is, the harder it is to understand the decision that was made. So another principle that's which is really important is fairness, to make sure that the intelligence, the artificial intelligence system which is in place is act in a fair way. So there is a well-known trade-off in artificial intelligence between accuracy and explainability. So for instance, you have rule-based systems. So rule-based systems are really easy. Let's take one example. If the temperature in the room is over 25 degrees, let's turn on the air conditioning. If it's below 22 degrees, let's turn off the air conditioning. That could be typically a rule-based system. Here, the explainability is really high. So because it's really easy to explain what's happening here. But then the accuracy is really low. What I mean by accuracy is we cannot fine-tune the temperature depending on who is in the room and depending on advanced context. So the accuracy is quite low. And then you have, for instance, linear regression, which is also really easy to explain and which is also not so accurate, depending on the situation. So this is typically the Hacklet calculator was some type of linear regression. Then we have some other system. I will not introduce each of them, but you can see that these systems are more accurate. So typically ensemble method is what the robot Hacklet is using. It's quite accurate, but then it's quite hard to explain why a certain decision was made by the robot. And then we have deep learning. So Amazon was probably using some deep learning. So if you have, when you implement an artificial intelligence system, if, for instance, you realize that linear regression can perform pretty well, you might prefer linear regression over deep learning, because if you use deep learning, then you completely lose control over the decision. It's not that you lose control, but you don't really understand why certain decisions are made by the algorithm. So typically, if Amazon was using decision tree instead of deep learning, we would train the model. We would have what we call a decision tree. And by simply looking at the decision tree, we could realize that some discriminatory decisions are made, which is not the case if you use deep learning. So it probably took a while to Amazon to realize that women were automatically excluded. So one key principle is transparency. So now let me just mention some Swiss startup and also some Canadian startup. First of all, Sophia Genetic. So they are using AI to detect cancer variants in raw genomic sequencing data. So they are valued over 1 billion and following the recent entry on NASDAQ. Way smaller startup is Inno in Geneva. They are leveraging AI to optimize domestic energy consumption. I think it's a really cool usage of AI. You also have NetGuardian, so they rely on AI to prevent financial fraud, and they raised 17 million last year, and they are used typically by Pictet and Lombard-Odier. As another example, you have Fertig. So I will not introduce Fertig again because Antoine did it perfectly. But as he mentioned, they are using AI, for instance, to detect that you are not anymore in public transportation. So you should not pay basically for just walking in the street. So they are using AI to help user not having to avoid having a bad experience paying for nothing. And as a last example, I will selfishly mention Odeya, so the startup that I co-founded, where we leverage AI to help sales and marketing team to engage with healthcare providers. Of course, there are thousands of other examples. I cannot be exhaustive, so please do not hesitate during the discussion if you would like to introduce a really cool startup that you know, or yeah, if you want to share some good example of startup or even bad example, that could be a nice start for a discussion. So I mentioned several principles of artificial intelligence. So they are all coming from a recent study, Principal Artificial Intelligence, Mapping Consensus in Ethical and Right-Based Approaches to Principles for AI. I really encourage everyone to have a look at this document. It's really well written, it's recent, and I quote, "It is our hope that the principal artificial intelligence project will be of use to policymakers, advocates, scholars, and others working on the front lines to capture the benefits and reduce the harms of AI technology as it continues to be developed and deployed around the globe." So briefly, AI is everywhere. AI will be used in the future, and it's important to keep in mind some key principles. Even if you are not a data scientist, you will most likely be involved in some AI project. Or if it's not the case, you are probably using AI as a user, because nowadays it's really hard to just avoid using AI. So now we are in the last part of this presentation. So I will talk a little bit more about my own research area, which is customer journey analytics. So in other words, it's how can we leverage artificial intelligence to extract insights that can make the customer experience more pleasant. So why do we need customer journey analytics? So nowadays, when you consume a service, for instance, if you want to buy some clothes, you can go on the website, you can go in the store, you can use the curbside pickup, you can use the app, you can maybe even go on Twitter or Facebook to buy your clothes. So the number of channels and the number of devices that you have is increasing. So the journeys become more and more complex, as every user might have its own journey. And it's also why there is a growing importance to understand the complex and unique interaction that exists to consumer service. So I will take now a concrete example of a car rental agency to better understand what I mean by customer journey. So a customer might rent a car at a service desk. So here I will depict it as a journey. So the first touch point or the first event is to rent a car at the service desk. The next event might be booking an insurance, and then picking up the car, and then returning the car. So this is only one of the many journeys that might exist when you rent a car. You might have a completely different journey. You might rent a car using a chatbot, you can pick up the car, then you have a car breakdown, and you return the car later, and then maybe you share some negative feedback on Facebook. So I would like to highlight that these journeys are different, and also something to keep in mind is that each of these events might have some contextual information attached to it, which makes it even harder to analyze. So for instance, we can have some demographic information. So for instance, the age or the gender. We might have the day of the week or the waiting time, the location of picking up the car, and many other contextual information that will influence how the journey is experienced by customers. So to deal with this, nowadays, most companies working in the service industries are using what we call customer journey mapping session to design the best customer experience. So what does it mean? So it's typically some decision makers within a company or marketers that are going in a working session on a blackboard, on a white, let's say a blackboard, and they are trying to put themselves in their customer shoes. So typically, if we would be in search workshop, we could hear stuff such as, okay, so now we have John, he's a young and shy guy that hates speaking over the phones. What can go wrong, or how can we make the life of John easier? So how can we improve this, the experience of customers that are similar to John? And this type of sessions are really important because ultimately they should lead to better customer experience. But of course, this is done by employees of the service provider. So it could be done by customers, but it cannot be done by all the customers. So it's quite hard to capture the information this way. So one question that I tackled during the last 6 years is, can we leverage AI to better understand customer journeys? One of the main challenges is that usually the machine learning technique or the technique that are often used in artificial intelligence works with tabular format. So it means that it's in 2 dimensions, like an Excel spreadsheet. But as I've shown, like these journeys are not 2-dimensional. So this is the reason why it's quite hard to apply the existing technique as is to extract some insights about customer journeys. So I will mention now some contribution that Pericles and myself have worked on the last few years. So the first contribution that I would like to highlight is accurate and transparent path prediction. So typically we have a journey, an ongoing journey. So let's say that these 3 different squares are an ongoing journey. So for instance, the first activity illustrated by the red square is renting a car. The second one is a car breakdown in blue. And the third one in gray is calling the insurance. Given these 3 events, we worked on an algorithm that can predict what is the most likely way that this journey will end. So predicting how the journey will end might be used to improve the customer experience, because then we can go ahead and if, for instance, we know that a customer might struggle and call the service desk, we might try to provide the information before he even has to ask. So this technique that we propose is accurate, and it is also transparent in a way that we are making some prediction, but we are also using a model that can explain why we are making these predictions. So, and typically if you use deep neural network, these systems are really complex and they are not more accurate than our approach. And also it's really hard to understand why the algorithm is predicting these 3 activities, for instance. So this is one of the contributions that we have done. Another contribution that we have done is also to group journeys that are similar. So for instance, here we could have 3 different groups of journeys that are similar, and not only similar in the sense of sequence of activities, but also similar in the sense that they might share some common contextual information. So for instance, for the first group, it might concern mostly location of one day. In the second group, it could be for young people. And the third group could be for what happened during the weekend. So this is a second contribution. In a more recent work, we also wanted to offer a new tool that can help to visualize and hence to better understand customer journeys. So typically in a company, you would not have 3 or 5 customer journeys, but you might have thousands and thousands of customer journeys. So if you want to visualize them, only just visualizing them is challenging because you have too many of them. So typically here, you can see at the bottom right, altogether we have 29,000 journeys. And of course, I cannot show all of them. So here we are only showing 30 of them, but we are not selecting 30 random journeys, but we are selecting the 30 journeys that best represent the 30,000 journeys. And in addition, we were also inspired, for instance, by technique that exists in Google Maps, where, in Google Maps, you can zoom in to see more granular information, or you can zoom out to see, for instance, the different countries. So the level, the number of information that you show depends on your zoom level. So this is what we have done here. I will show you a video. So at the bottom right here, you can see the total number of journeys, and maybe you are interested in a specific area. So you would zoom in exactly like in Google Maps, and it would zoom and you can see more details. But of course, as you go the more you zoom, the less journeys it is. So the more detailed will be the view. And at the end, you only see like 2 journeys because you cannot zoom anymore. So this is work in progress. Part of it has been published, and for the other part, we are working on it. I also propose like a platform to navigate in customer journeys. So you can use this platform to better understand the link between the contextual information and the sequence of activities. So it looks like this. So you can you can see a customer journey map, but it's an interactive customer journey map. So you can click on it and you would change your position in a tree, and you can see some statistical information. So this is another contribution that we have done. So I don't have time for to show more about what we have done, but everything is on customer-journey.me. So please do not hesitate to go there if you are interested, and also please do not hesitate to contact me, and I would be happy to give you further details. Sorry for the really bad animation, but I like this kind of animation. And so what's next? For customer journeys, I believe that in the future, we might see a better integration between AI and human decision-making. So typically, we have a phase where we will discover some customer journey and analyze them. So to analyze customer journeys, you might use, for instance, the tool that I just shown before, but you can also use the good old interviews, because using interviews, you will have different kind of information than if you are using AI. So it's different type of information that are both really useful. So to do the journey analysis, once you analyze the journey, you might want to take some decision to redesign the journey. So for instance, if you realize that something, that some type of customers are not happy with some process, then you can decide to change it for this type of customer. So you would redesign the journey. So this is typically a human intervention. And then you would monitor just to make sure that what you have changed in the journey has a positive impact for customer journeys. So to monitor the journey here, that would typically be some AI techniques, because you would use automation to analyze the different type of journeys that you have in your database. And then, of course, because you redesign the journey, you might discover new journeys that were not existing before. So this is a life cycle, and in this life cycle, you can see that we use both artificial intelligence and human decision making. And I believe that as of now, most companies are using either human decision making or they rely on artificial intelligence systems, but it's really hard to find a solution that integrates well both of them. So this life cycle is inspired by the BPM life cycle, and you can read more about this in my thesis. So I'm close to the conclusion right now. So I will try to provide few takeaways. So AI, it's a loose definition of AI, because basically, as we have seen, we can call pretty much everything AI, which many companies are not afraid to do. So it's important to not be impressed by this AI world, AI term, and that usually business decision makers will be better than AI experts to understand the input and the output. So it's important that business decision makers, when they want to develop some AI technologies, that they really spend some time to understand what is the input and what is the output, even if what will be done in the system could be harder to catch, but at least understanding the input and the output shouldn't be difficult. And so doing this and applying the 8 key principles, we can make sure that AI goes in the right direction, and that's it. So sorry, I went one slide I will go back to the conclusion and finish my presentation here. So thanks a lot again for your time. And yes, thanks a lot for the Swiss Canadian Chamber of Commerce for the invitation. And please do not hesitate to ask any question that you might have.
Thank you so much, Gael. That was really interesting, and my brain was working in overdrive because we just had our annual planning, and my colleagues in operations are desperate to cut the number of people who contact customer care, because that's the enemy of companies. Because every time somebody contacts customer care, first, nobody likes to do it, and then we need to spend X minutes processing their claims. So correct me if I'm wrong, but what we could do is use your research or consultants with your expertise to say, okay, every time somebody ends up in customer care, what happened before that? What are all the steps? And let's find commonalities in maybe where things went wrong, and then pick up people at these juncture points and maybe give them better information, or encourage them to behave in a different way so that they don't end up contacting us, right?
Yes, exactly. So I applied this kind of techniques for the city of Lausanne for a ticketing system, where like you have some tickets. So for instance, if you have some issue with your computer, you would call the service desk and they would open a ticket. And typically, if it's for many different issues, like losing the password, or the keyboard which is not working, the screen is not working, or the link is not working. So this is really easy to put a label on it and to apply some automated process. But then you have some issues that are really complex and that take most of the time. So yeah, you can use this kind of techniques to, for instance, to try to find commonalities between the different like tickets or the different issues that customer might have. And if you realize that if it's only one customer that has a specific issue, then it's okay, because maybe it's just the customer didn't use the right service and you will just lose one customer. But if like hundreds of customers have the same issue, then it's better to be proactive and to solve the issue for these customers. And typically these techniques could be used to identify that 100 customers have the same issue, because 100 customers is nothing if you have millions of customers.
Well, thank you. We had a few questions, and so it seems like data is the fuel of AI. The more data you have to play with, the better you can predict how others will behave. So I think there was an incident with one of these home assistants where the company, Google, Amazon, whoever it was of course mining the snippets that people were using to talk to Alexa or other assistants, and it came to light that it was entirely anonymous, and so humans could actually hear these snippets. So do we have to worry about anonymity? And the question was, how can we know that our data is made anonymous?
For sure. Yes, for sure. In the presentation, I said that you have to decide how much privacy you are willing to give up for some AI technologies. But the issue is that like service provider like Facebook, they have shown in the past that they don't really care about privacy. So they would not even be really transparent and say, okay, if you give up this, we would give up this kind of information. So in the ideal world, you would say, okay, I'm willing to give this information to have this information back. But what happens in practice is that you don't really know what's captured about you. And yeah, this is a main issue. And it's really difficult to manage, because yeah, these companies are so huge now that they are bigger than governments. So yeah, it's a big issue for sure.
Well, I have to say, because the company I work for is based in Switzerland, and we have a lot of clients in Europe, we are under very close scrutiny by privacy officers. And so we're fully transparent. When you pay with Fairtick, yes, we do track where you're going, but we tell you exactly what happens to your data, who can see it, how long we keep it, et cetera, under what is called GDPR in Europe. So there is legislation. Canadian legislation is not bad. Unfortunately, there is no American legislation. It's all voluntary. And some states, there's a bit of a patchwork in the states. So I think that was an excellent question. We all have to be, as it stands, we have to be vigilant individually, right? There were a couple of questions about Eno and Odaya. So how AI is used by Eno and Odaya, and based on your experience, co-founding Odaya, how is it really working, and how is it making a difference?
So I would talk for Odaya because I work in the company. For Eno, I don't have any inside knowledge. So
okay.
I would be better to answer with Odaya. So at Odaya, typically you have thousands of you can learn from thousands and thousands of interaction. So typically, a sales rep would not have time to go to all the customers. So like you have a decision to make to like focus on some customers. And so in this case, AI is used to learn, basically to learn which contextual information about the customer has an impact on whether or not the chance that the sales rep will influence them. So in a way, AI here is used to measure the correlation between the contextual information and the behaviors of the patient. So you can better target basically the customers and avoid, for instance, contacting customers by phone while maybe they hate being contacted by phone. So all of this is insight that you can extract using artificial intelligence. So how it is done exactly, it's really complex because for some information, you would use what we call clustering. So you would cluster customers that are similar. For some other techniques, for some other information that are more process related, you would use typically something called process mining. So it's like artificial intelligence to extract information from sequences of information or more business processes. And yeah, it really depends. So it's an ecosystem of different techniques between machine learning, clustering, and process mining that are used to extract insights so that then you can take decision. And it's important to notice that to note that Odaya would typically still require some human decision. So you would show some information to the sales rep, and then the sales rep will take a decision. But you might show the same information, but two sales rep will react differently, which is really good because then it means that you can still use some decision-making, human decision-making, which is important in marketing.
Yes, just like my Nest thermostat, which used AI to decide that the nighttime temperature should be 15 without recommending it to me first. So I appreciate the opportunity to make that decision myself and not have a machine do it for me. So do you have examples of how clients may have changed their processes as a result of using Odaya?
So yeah, that could typically be for the channels. So for the different channels that the customer might use. So identifying really which factor has an influence on which channel is preferred impacted how the customer were reached. So it was more targeted, and also the fact that when you use clustering techniques, you can have better fine-tune your customer, because before Odaya, some companies were like just creating some group of customers and selling like some stuff to really large group of customers. But if you use AI, you can have more fine-tune a smaller group of customers. So this is two different kind of impact that Odaya had on their customer.
Cool. There was another question. You referred to deep learning when you talked about Amazon in the top left quadrant of that diagram. And so everybody nodded, deep learning. Yes, sure. And the question is, what is it exactly as opposed to shallow learning or not deep learning? What should we know about that?
So I can go back. I don't know. So for deep learning, so it's deep in the sense that you have like, it's more abstract because you will have more depth in your neural network, and that could be a bit advanced. But basically, what you should know is that it's not so hard to implement deep learning. It's not really harder than to implement a deep learning model than implementing, for instance, a decision tree. So in terms of implementing it, the complexity is the same. It's simply that it's the explainability that will not be the same, because then you would have a really deep architecture of neurons that doesn't really mean something. So you cannot extract knowledge from it. You can just take your input, give it to the deep learning model, and it will output something. While if you have like a decision tree, you have better control over it. So I don't know if it answered the questions, but
yeah, and linking it to what you said, because AI doesn't have inherent values, it's one thing to ask your colleague, what's your instinct, what's your hunch, and then you trust that colleague because you share the same values. But then the computer that tells you don't hire that person, you don't necessarily know what values they have, because and so that's where maybe as an observer it's a bit worrisome to trust these black boxes unless you can really reverse engineer how that decision was made, or if you have full visibility, for example, into the pile of resumes that was recommended to go forward and the pile of resumes that was recommended not to go forward, so that you can audit it and make sure that the decisions or recommendations are consistent with your values, right?
yes, you're right.
So that's all very nice, but let's say I'm an old-fashioned, middle-aged businessman and I have no intention of using AI in my business. Why should I care?
Why not? It's I think we are at the time where if you don't care about AI and you have your own business, for some industries that could be completely fine. But in some other industries, if you are not using AI, but your competitors are using AI, then you will have like a gap with them. So they would use more information. They would be able to process more information. So most likely they will generate a higher revenue. So yeah, it really depends on the industry. For some industries, I think it's completely fine to not use AI. But yeah, I mean, it's
right.
It's a hard question because
it's a missed opportunity, and it's kind of happening to you anyway if you use certain service providers. So
exactly.
We're arriving at the end of our time, and as I said, we will be Swiss about it, rewarding everybody who came on time, allowed us to start on time. So thank you so much. That was really interesting. As I said, the little wheels are starting to turn. As a delegate on the Council of the Swiss Abroad, I would like to remind my countrymen and women that there is a vote, as we do about 4 times a year, coming up in February. We should all have received our envelopes. No AI required to vote. Put a stamp on the envelope and send it back. Democracy is really important. And if you have any questions about the Council of the Swiss Abroad, our job is to represent you in Switzerland. Just don't hesitate to contact me. And having said that, I will hand it over to Alexandra for final closing remarks. Thanks again, Gael.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Gael and Antoine. Gael, it's been a fantastic presentation, and I wish you every success with your company in the future, and with your return to Switzerland, which is coming up soon, I believe. To everyone who attended our webinar today, thank you so much for being here. It has been our first webinar of the year, but it's going to be way more coming up, and hopefully we'll be able to meet in person again very soon. So please stay tuned, visit our website at swissbiz.ca, join our mailing list, and even better, become a member of our chamber. So I wish all of you a very good evening, a good continuation of your day, and I hope to see you soon again. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alexandra. Thank you, Anton. And thank you, everyone.